The year was 1943. The world was at war. The skies above the Atlantic Ocean, vast and unforgiving, were home to countless stories of battles, survival, and heroism. But among these countless tales, one story stood out, not because of the weapons used or the tactical brilliance behind it, but because of something far more mysterious that took place during the heat of conflict. It began like any other routine mission. A flying boat, an amphibious aircraft designed to navigate both land and water, soared high above the endless expanse of the Atlantic. Its mission was clear: reconnaissance and protection for the convoys that carried vital supplies across the war-torn sea. The flying boat, sleek and powerful, sliced through the sky, its engines humming as it traveled with purpose. But beneath the calm surface, an unexpected battle was about to unfold, one that would challenge not just the crew's survival but their very understanding of reality. On the dark waters below, a U-boat lurked, silent, deadly. The U-boat was a weapon of war that had terrorized the Atlantic since the very beginning of the conflict. It had one purpose: to sink enemy ships, cutting off supplies and strangling the opposing side's lifeblood. The flying boat, however, was not an easy target. It was faster than most of the aircraft the U-boat had encountered and capable of taking off from water and engaging from above. But the U-boat's captain, a seasoned and ruthless commander, had his own tactics. He knew that in this deadly game of cat and mouse, it was not just speed and firepower that mattered, it was the element of surprise. As the flying boat approached a convoy, the crew had no idea that danger was closing in from beneath the waves. The U-boat, having already submerged, was silently tracking its prey, waiting for the right moment to strike. The flying boat's crew was focused, their eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of enemy aircraft or surface vessels. They didn't yet know that this seemingly ordinary mission would soon spiral into something far beyond their understanding. Without warning, the U-boat surfaced, rising from the depths like a predator emerging from the shadows. In an instant, the battle began. The flying boat, caught off guard, veered sharply, diving toward the ocean to avoid the deadly barrage of torpedoes. The crew scrambled to regain control, pulling their aircraft back into the sky just in time to avoid a direct hit. Below them, the U-boat fired again, its powerful guns sending shells crashing into the water. The skies above the Atlantic were alive with the sounds of war: the roar of engines, the sharp crack of gunfire, and the distant thud of explosions. The flying boat was nimble, but the U-boat was relentless, using its stealth and power to strike when least expected. The crew of the flying boat fought back, unleashing their own firepower in an attempt to disable the enemy. The battle raged on, each side desperately trying to outmaneuver the other, but something was wrong. As the battle continued, the crew of the flying boat began to notice strange, unexplained phenomena. The instruments inside the cockpit flickered, their readings fluctuating wildly. The once smooth flight path seemed to warp, as though the very air around them was shifting. At first, the crew dismissed it as a result of the chaos surrounding them, but as the strange disturbances continued, unease began to set in. Was it possible that something more than just the battle was affecting their aircraft? The tension in the cockpit was palpable. The crew, battle-hardened and accustomed to danger, couldn't shake the feeling that they were no longer just fighting a U-boat. There was something else at play, something they couldn't see but could feel all around them. The laws of nature, the rules of physics, seemed to be bending in ways they could not explain. As the flying boat continued to evade the U-boat's attacks, the strange phenomena only intensified. The air around them grew thick, the colors of the sky shifting as though they were crossing some invisible boundary. Instruments inside the cockpit now registered erratic spikes and drops, the crew's readings no longer matching what their eyes could see. Something had changed, but what? At that moment, a faint, eerie glow appeared in the distance. It wasn't the sun's reflection on the ocean or a distant storm. It was something different. The glow seemed to pulse with an unnatural rhythm, like a heartbeat in the vast emptiness of the sky. The crew's attention snapped to it, their focus shifting away from the U-boat, their instincts telling them that this strange light might be more of a threat than the battle they had been engaged in. Was this a sign? Was the battle between the flying boat and the U-boat just a prelude to something much greater, something beyond their comprehension? The glow in the distance grew brighter, drawing the crew's gaze. The U-boat, now seemingly aware of the same anomaly, stopped its assault, eerily still in the water. Both sides were now staring at the same phenomenon, wondering if they had both stepped into a realm that no human had ever touched before. And then it happened. Without warning, the flying boat was pulled upward as if by an invisible force. The crew struggled to maintain control, their hands gripped tight on the controls as the plane rose higher and higher into the sky. The ocean below them seemed to stretch away, becoming a distant memory. The strange light intensified, and the very air around them seemed to shimmer. It was as if time itself had slowed or perhaps stretched. But it wasn't just the flying boat that was affected. The U-boat, still below the surface, began to rise as well. Not in the way a submarine does when it surfaces, but unnaturally, almost as though it was being drawn up by an unseen hand. It wasn't just the ships, the sea, the sky. The very fabric of reality seemed to bend and twist in ways that the crew could not explain. They had crossed into something else, something beyond the world they knew. In that moment, the battle between the flying boat and the U-boat no longer seemed important. The crew of the flying boat were no longer just soldiers fighting a war. They were witnesses to something far greater than they could ever have imagined, something that could change everything they knew about their place in the universe. What was happening to them? Was this a natural phenomenon, a cosmic anomaly that had somehow drawn them into its path? Or was this the result of something far more intentional, something that had been set in motion long before they ever took flight? As the flying boat rose, drawn toward the strange glow, the crew could only wonder what lay ahead. What force had taken hold of them? What mysteries would they uncover in the depths of space and time? Were they about to embark on a journey that no one, not even the most seasoned pilots, could have prepared for? The answer was just out of reach, hidden in the vast, uncharted skies above them. All they could do was hold on and wait. For the flying boat and its crew, the battle with the U-boat had become something far more important than they could ever have known. They had unknowingly crossed a boundary, one that would take them far beyond the limits of Earth and into the unknown. The question was no longer about the U-boat or the war. It was about survival, discovery, and the strange, powerful forces of the universe that were now guiding their fate. And so, the first chapter of their incredible journey began. The skies above the Atlantic were quiet now, but the silence was deceiving. The once relentless battle between the flying boat and the U-boat had all but ceased, replaced by an eerie calm. But it was not the kind of peace that signaled safety or respite. Instead, it was a quiet that hung heavily, like a storm that had yet to break. The strange glowing light in the distance remained, pulsing softly, as though calling to the aircraft and its crew. They were now on a journey not of their choosing, and they could only guess where this path would lead. As the flying boat continued its ascent, the crew felt an unsettling weightlessness begin to fill the cockpit. The instruments that had once guided them with certainty now flickered erratically. The compass spun wildly, and the altimeter seemed to lose all sense of direction. It was as if they had left the very rules of navigation behind, floating in a void where nothing made sense. The crew, experienced and unflinching in the face of danger, exchanged uneasy glances. They had flown through storms, evaded enemy fire, and weathered more than their fair share of rough skies, but nothing had prepared them for this. The strange pull they felt was not just the force of the light, it was something else, something deeper, like an invisible hand guiding them towards an unknown destination. Captain Riley, the seasoned leader of the flying boat's crew, clenched the control yoke with a tight grip. His eyes were fixed on the instrument panel, trying to make sense of the chaos before him. He was a man who had seen war up close, who had faced death countless times. But this was different. His mind raced. What kind of force could create such disruption? Was it a natural phenomenon? Or was it something far beyond anything humanity had ever encountered? As Riley wrestled with the controls, trying to steady the aircraft, his radio crackled to life. It was a low, distorted sound, but it was enough to catch his attention. The voice on the other end was distorted, like a faint echo from a distant, unreachable place. "Captain, the U-boat, it's following us." Riley's heart skipped a beat. The U-boat, how could that be possible? It had been submerged, and their ascent had been so rapid, so sudden, that it should have been left far behind. But the voice on the radio, now barely a whisper, seemed to confirm something that defied all logic. The U-boat was not just following them. It was being drawn upward with them. The same invisible force that had taken hold of the flying boat had also seized the U-boat. Both vessels were now caught in the same strange pull, moving through the atmosphere as if bound by an unseen tether. The rest of the crew exchanged worried looks. Sergeant Matthews, the aircraft's navigator, was the first to speak. "Captain, I'm seeing something strange." His voice was laced with confusion and fear. Riley turned to him, his brow furrowed. "What do you mean, Matthews?" Matthews pointed to the forward windows, his hand trembling slightly. The others followed his gaze. What they saw made their stomachs drop. The once clear sky above had darkened, swirling with strange clouds that seemed to spiral in unnatural patterns. But it wasn't just the clouds. In the distance, where the strange light had once pulsed, there was now something far more ominous. A dark, swirling vortex had opened in the sky. It was as if a tear had appeared in the fabric of reality itself, its edges flickering like the distorted ripples in water. It was a doorway, a passage that beckoned them, but with a threat they could not yet understand. "Is that a storm?" asked Corporal Harris, his voice shaky. "No," Riley replied, his voice tight. "That's not a storm, that's something else." Before anyone could react, the flying boat was pulled faster toward the vortex. It was not a gentle push. It was as if the very air around them had turned into a current, dragging the aircraft toward the gaping darkness. Riley fought with the controls, pushing the throttle to its maximum, trying to escape the gravitational pull. But it was no use. The invisible force was too powerful, and the aircraft was helpless in its grip. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the pull intensified. The crew gasped as the world outside seemed to warp. The ocean below, once a comforting, steady presence, now appeared to twist and stretch, becoming a disorienting blur. The horizon, once clear, now looked like a jagged line that bent unnaturally. Nothing made sense anymore. The laws of physics, once so dependable, were breaking down. Riley's heart pounded in his chest as the flying boat neared the vortex. His mind raced. What was this thing? How had they crossed into a space where the very rules of nature no longer applied? And what lay beyond that dark, swirling portal? Just before they reached the event horizon of the vortex, a sudden flash of light filled the cockpit, blinding everyone. The crew shielded their eyes, but it was no use. The brilliance overwhelmed them, and in that moment, they were thrust into complete darkness. For a long moment, the crew lost all sense of time. The feeling of weightlessness persisted, and the flying boat seemed to float in an endless void. There was no up or down, no left or right, only an all-encompassing blackness that pressed in on them from all sides. It felt as though they were suspended in a space where reality itself had ceased to exist. Then, as quickly as it had all started, the light faded. The oppressive darkness lifted, and the crew blinked, disoriented. Slowly, their surroundings began to come into focus. What they saw took their breath away. The flying boat had emerged from the vortex into an entirely new dimension, a place unlike anything they had ever imagined. The sky was no longer the blue of Earth, nor the gray of storm clouds. It was a strange, deep purple, streaked with flashes of bright, otherworldly light. The stars overhead were unfamiliar, too numerous, too bright, like fireflies in a cosmic sea. They seemed to pulse with a rhythm of their own, as if each one had a life force of its own. The landscape below was just as strange. The ocean, once so familiar, had disappeared. In its place was a vast, swirling expanse of luminous gas, glowing with an eerie greenish-blue hue. It was like a sea of light, stretching endlessly, with no land in sight. The flying boat seemed to float above this strange world, suspended in a perfect silence. But the strangest part of all was the feeling of being watched. It was as if they were not alone in this dimension, as though unseen eyes were observing their every move. The crew shuddered, and Riley's pulse quickened. They had entered a place beyond their understanding, a place where the rules of time and space no longer applied. For a moment, all was silent. The crew could only stare in awe and fear, unable to comprehend the full scope of what had just occurred. They had left behind the familiar skies of Earth, and now found themselves in an alien realm, suspended between realities. As the flying boat floated in this strange, uncharted space, the crew was struck by one terrifying thought. They were no longer in control. The vortex had taken them here, and now they had no way of knowing how or if they would ever return home. The U-boat, too, had been drawn into this new dimension. The dark shape of the submarine appeared below them, its once menacing form now distant and silent. But it was still there, caught in the same grip of this strange force. Riley turned to his crew, his face pale with the weight of what they had just experienced. "I don't know where we are," he said, his voice low and steady despite the fear in his chest. "But we need to stay calm. We need to understand what we're dealing with here." But even as he spoke, Riley knew that the answers were not going to come easily. They were trapped in a world they didn't belong to, a world that held secrets they were not yet ready to uncover. And somewhere in the vast expanse of this unknown dimension, something was watching, waiting. The question now wasn't whether they could escape, but if they could survive what awaited them in this new, hostile reality. The unknown had become their new enemy. This part continues building suspense and introduces the vast unknown that awaits the crew, taking them into a dimension beyond Earth. The chapter leaves the crew in a place of fear and awe, unsure of where their journey will take them next. The mysterious force, the appearance of the U-boat, and the strange new reality all point to a grander mystery that will unfold in the following chapters. The crew of the flying boat was no longer on Earth, that much was certain. As they floated in the strange, otherworldly expanse of luminous gas, suspended in a dimension beyond their understanding, they tried to process the magnitude of what had just happened. The fear that gripped them was unlike anything they had experienced before. This was not a battle against a U-boat or an enemy aircraft. This was not a mission of survival or war. It was something far more terrifying. They were caught in a cosmic event, a force far beyond human comprehension, and it was pulling them deeper into the unknown. Captain Riley, who had spent years navigating through war zones, evading enemy fire, and leading his crew through countless dangers, now found himself facing something he could not control. The flying boat, once a symbol of strength and purpose, was now helpless, adrift in a universe that didn't play by the rules they knew. Every instrument on board seemed to be malfunctioning, as if it too had become lost in this strange dimension. "Captain, look." Corporal Harris pointed towards the front of the aircraft, his voice filled with awe. Riley's gaze followed his outstretched arm, and what he saw made his heart race. The strange light that had first drawn them into this realm was now far more than just a distant glow. It had expanded, filling the sky before them with a blinding radiance. The light was not just a visual phenomenon, it was alive. It pulsated in rhythmic patterns, almost like a heartbeat. As the crew stared at it, the light seemed to change, shifting from a blinding white to hues of deep violet and electric blue, and then back to a bright, almost metallic silver. Each shift in color seemed to trigger a new sensation in the air around them: pressure, warmth, cold, even a feeling of dizziness that seemed to grow stronger the closer they came to it. It wasn't just the light that was strange. The stars, too, were unlike anything the crew had ever seen. They were not like the familiar pinpricks of light in the night sky back on Earth. These stars were vast, swirling masses of light and dark, like nebulas caught in a cosmic dance. They moved imperceptibly at first, but as the crew watched, it became clear that they were not stationary. The stars seemed to be drawn toward the glowing light, their movements not governed by the laws of gravity as the crew knew them, but by some unseen force that pulled them in. "This is impossible," Matthews, the navigator, muttered under his breath. He was the closest thing to a scientist on board, and even he had no words for what they were witnessing. "This isn't just space. This is something else entirely. This is cosmic energy, a force we don't understand." Riley clenched his fists, his mind racing. The strange light, the shifting stars, the anomalous pull they were experiencing, all of it pointed to one terrifying possibility. Could this be some kind of gateway? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. A portal to another dimension or even another part of the universe. Matthews didn't answer right away. He was too absorbed in trying to make sense of the data flashing across his screen, which seemed more and more like a jumble of meaningless numbers. "I don't know," he said finally. "But whatever it is, we're in the middle of it now, and I think we're being pulled deeper." The aircraft continued its slow drift toward the center of the pulsing light, as if guided by an invisible hand. The crew tried everything they could to break free. The engines roared to life, the flaps adjusted, and Riley fought with the yoke, but nothing seemed to alter their course. It was as if they were trapped in a current of space and time that they couldn't escape. The vortex they had entered seemed to have its own rules, its own will, and they were powerless against it. Then, in an instant, the crew's surroundings shifted once again. The light grew blindingly bright, and the stars around them seemed to converge toward the center of the glowing sphere. The flying boat lurched forward as if it had been caught in a magnetic pull, and for a brief moment the crew felt their bodies being pressed into their seats. It was a sensation unlike anything they had ever experienced, like the universe itself was compressing them, testing their very existence. And then, without warning, everything stopped. The oppressive pressure vanished. The stars settled into their previous slow-moving dance. The strange light that had enveloped them was now just a distant glow, and the flying boat was no longer being drawn toward it. Instead, the crew found themselves in a space that felt vast, yet somehow contained, like they had entered the core of the universe itself. There was no sign of the U-boat, nor any other object in sight. They were alone in this place, drifting through a timeless void. For a moment, there was only silence. Then Matthew spoke again, his voice barely a whisper. "I think we've entered the heart of the cosmos." It was a statement that resonated with every member of the crew. They had crossed some invisible threshold, gone beyond the edge of human understanding, and into a realm where even the most advanced science could offer no explanation. They were now in a part of the universe where the normal rules of physics didn't apply. Time and space, once dependable guides, had become fluid concepts. The sky around them was no longer a familiar blue or gray. It was a mixture of vibrant purples, blues, and golds, as if they had entered a realm where colors were not limited by the physical world. But there was something else. The crew felt it in the air around them, a presence. It was not a physical entity, but something far more subtle, a sensation of being watched, of being observed by forces they could not comprehend. Riley felt it deep in his bones, an overwhelming sense that they were no longer alone, that the universe was aware of their intrusion. "We're not just in some distant part of space," Riley said slowly, his voice firm despite the uncertainty swirling in his mind. "We've crossed into something else, something conscious." He didn't have to finish the thought. The crew understood, whatever this place was. It wasn't just a random location in the universe. It was alive in its own way, and it was watching them. Sergeant Harris, who had been silent up until now, spoke with a tremor in his voice. "Do you think it's alien?" he asked. "Some kind of intelligence beyond our understanding?" Riley shook his head, his eyes narrowing as he peered out the cockpit window. "I don't know, but we've entered a place where the usual rules don't apply. Whatever this is, it's not of this world, and we need to understand it, because if we don't, we might not make it back." The thought of returning home seemed more distant now than ever. In fact, the idea of returning to Earth, to everything they knew, felt almost irrelevant. They had been pulled into a place that defied logic, where even the laws of nature were in flux. The war, the U-boat, everything they had known, seemed like a distant memory, a dream from which they had awoken into something far more complex. But even as they tried to grasp the enormity of their situation, the most troubling thought began to gnaw at their minds. Had they been brought here by accident, or was this an intentional act? Had their battle with the U-boat somehow triggered this journey, or had the U-boat too been drawn into this dimension for a purpose? And if it had a purpose, what was that purpose? What was the force that had brought them here? And why were they being watched? These questions lingered in the air, unanswered, as the flying boat drifted in the vast cosmic void. The The crew knew that they were no longer just survivors of a war. They were now participants in a cosmic mystery that had only just begun to unfold, and somewhere, hidden in the swirling expanse of the stars, the answer awaited them. In this chapter, the crew finds themselves pulled deeper into the unknown, facing the reality of a cosmic force that exists beyond the realm of Earth. The sensation of being observed, the strange lights, and the feeling that they are trapped in a dimension that doesn't obey the rules of nature all build the mystery surrounding their journey. The crew's confusion grows as they realize they are not just fighting a U-boat or even a war anymore. They are caught in a larger cosmic enigma. The crew sat in stunned silence as they continued to drift in the vast cosmic void. The strange, pulsating light that had drawn them into this otherworldly realm was no longer just a distant beacon. It had now become the focal point of their attention, a mysterious force that seemed to exert a gravitational pull on the very fabric of their reality. The air in the cockpit was thick with tension, as if the weight of the unknown had pressed down upon them. Captain Riley, still gripping the control yoke, stared out the cockpit window, his eyes narrowed. The universe beyond them was alien, a sight that no human had ever laid eyes on before. Stars in this dimension didn't twinkle, they pulsed, their light ebbing and flowing in a rhythm that seemed far too deliberate. The nebulae and cosmic clouds around them swirled with an unnatural grace, their movements slow, deliberate, and oddly synchronized. It felt like they had crossed into a space where time itself was an afterthought. Riley had spent years navigating the skies above Earth, but this was a completely different world. In the distance, the glow had taken on an almost hypnotic quality, drawing them closer with an undeniable force. His mind raced, struggling to make sense of what was happening. He had once believed the universe to be a vast, unknowable place, but now it felt like they had been pulled into the very heart of something ancient, something that had existed long before humanity even dreamed of the stars. "How long have we been here?" Matthews, the navigator, asked quietly. His voice sounded distant, as if the weight of their situation was finally beginning to settle on him. Riley glanced at the clock, though he wasn't sure how accurate the time would be anymore. "I don't know, hours, maybe longer. Time doesn't seem to work the same way here." Sergeant Harris, who had been keeping a careful watch on their surroundings, suddenly spoke. "Captain, look at this." He pointed towards the window, his voice strained. Riley followed his gaze. There, just beyond the reach of the glowing light, something was changing. A ripple, like a wave moving through water, began to form in the fabric of the cosmic expanse. The stars themselves seemed to warp and bend around it, creating an almost surreal effect. And then the wave expanded, taking shape, becoming a defined, twisting spiral. "Is that what I think it is?" Matthews murmured, a hint of awe in his voice. He had been quiet up until this point, absorbed in his readings, but now even he seemed to sense the gravity of the situation. "A wormhole," Riley said quietly. His voice carried an edge of disbelief. It was a concept known only in science fiction, but there was no denying the swirling vortex that had formed before them. It was unmistakable, a portal in space-time, a gateway that could potentially take them anywhere in the universe, or perhaps even beyond it. The idea that a wormhole existed was not new to the crew. They had heard of the theoretical concept in scientific circles. A wormhole, or an Einstein-Rosen bridge, was said to be a shortcut through space-time, a tunnel connecting two distant points in the universe. It could, in theory, allow for instantaneous travel across vast distances, bypassing the limitations of light-speed travel. But those were just theories, concepts too advanced, too far beyond humanity's reach to consider as anything more than hypothetical. And yet, here they were staring at one with their own eyes. The crew fell silent as they watched the wormhole expand, its edges shifting and rippling like liquid metal. It wasn't like the calm, stable wormholes depicted in science fiction movies. This one was unstable, pulsing with energy, almost alive. It seemed to breathe, opening and closing as if testing its own existence. The fabric of space around it warped and twisted, creating a mesmerizing yet unsettling display. "We need to make a decision," Riley said, his voice steady but filled with uncertainty. He turned toward the crew. "We're being pulled towards that wormhole. If we enter it, there's no telling where it'll take us. It could be the key to getting back to Earth, or it could take us somewhere else entirely." The crew exchanged looks. They had come this far, been pulled into the unknown against their will, and now they faced an unimaginable choice. The wormhole was not just an anomaly, it was an opportunity. But an opportunity for what? To escape, to return home, or to venture even further into the abyss where no human had ever dared to go. Matthews, usually the calm and rational one, spoke up first. "I don't think we have a choice, Captain. We've been pulled into this dimension by something we don't understand. If we don't take this chance, we might be stuck here forever." Riley nodded slowly, understanding the urgency in Matthews' words. But something still nagged at the back of his mind. The U-boat. It had been pulled into this dimension with them, and now it too was drifting in space somewhere nearby, caught in the same cosmic current. But the wormhole seemed to have its own gravity, its own call. It wasn't just pulling them toward it, it was pulling everything around them. If they entered it, what would happen to the U-boat? Would it follow them? Would they be caught in some new trap? Far away from Earth. Are we certain this is our only way out? Riley asked, his voice almost a whisper. What if it's a trap? What if entering the wormhole will take us further into this place and we'll never be able to return? No one answered at first. The idea of returning home, of escaping this strange dimension, was a hope they all clung to, but Riley's words were heavy with the possibility of danger. The unknown was tempting, yes, but it was also filled with peril. The wormhole could be their salvation or their doom. Sergeant Harris cleared his throat. We don't know what will happen, Captain, but standing here and doing nothing isn't going to get us home. We've been stuck in this strange dimension for hours, days maybe. If we don't act now, we could lose the chance to get back to Earth forever. Riley took a deep breath and exhaled slowly. You're right, we can't just sit here. We need to make a choice, and we need to make it fast. The final look toward the swirling vortex, Riley made his decision. He pushed the throttle forward, guiding the flying boat towards the wormhole. The aircraft responded slowly, its engines humming as it inched closer to the massive cosmic portal. As they approached, the very fabric of reality seemed to bend around them, warping and twisting in ways that defied all logic. The pull of the wormhole grew stronger, almost irresistible. It was as though they were being swallowed whole. The crew held their breath as they neared the event horizon. The stars outside blurred into streaks of light, and the space around them seemed to collapse inward. The wormhole pulsed once more, then in an instant the flying boat was sucked in. Everything went dark. For a moment the crew felt as though they were trapped in a vortex of endless night. There was no sensation of motion, no sound, just a disorienting feeling of being suspended in nothingness. Then, without warning, the light returned, blinding and overwhelming. The flying boat was thrown violently from one end of the wormhole to the other, tossed like a ship in a storm. The crew was tossed against their seats, their bodies pressed into their harnesses as the world around them seemed to spin uncontrollably. Captain Riley gritted his teeth, desperately trying to maintain control. But the force of the wormhole was too great, too unpredictable. The plane shuddered as it was pulled through the cosmic tunnel, the very structure of space-time bending around them. The sensation was beyond anything any of them had ever felt. It was as if they were caught in the very fabric of the universe itself. And then, just as quickly as it had all begun, the chaos stopped. The flying boat emerged from the wormhole, and the universe around them snapped back into focus. The stars outside were no longer twisted, no longer distorted by the grip of the wormhole. The sky, if you could even call it that, was dark and empty, filled with the faintest glimmers of distant stars. It was a familiar sight, yet somehow it felt wrong. Riley looked out the window, his heart racing as he tried to make sense of what he was seeing. The aircraft was no longer in the strange dimension they had been trapped in, it was somewhere else entirely. The crew had entered the unknown, but what awaited them now? What new dangers, what cosmic mysteries lay ahead? And more importantly, had they finally found a way back to Earth? Or had the wormhole taken them even further from home? In this chapter, the crew faces the decision to enter the wormhole, which represents both a potential escape and an unknown danger. The uncertainty of what lies beyond the wormhole grows as they enter the vortex, not knowing where it will take them. The tension builds as the crew is thrown into the chaotic experience of crossing a wormhole, only to emerge in a completely new, unfamiliar part of the universe. The journey continues as they confront the mystery of their new reality. As the flying boat emerged from the wormhole, the crew found themselves in a universe far different from the one they had just left. The stars outside the windows were faint, dimmer than those they had seen on Earth. There was a strange stillness to the sky, a quiet so profound it made the crew feel as though they had crossed into a realm where time itself was paused, holding its breath in anticipation. Captain Riley was the first to speak, his voice shaking slightly. "This isn't the space we know. This place feels wrong." His eyes scanned the void, trying to find any recognizable landmark, but there was nothing, only the black expanse of the unknown filled with faint glimmers of stars. The instruments on the flying boat flickered, unstable and unreliable. Matthews, the navigator, was typing furiously on his console, but the readings made no sense. "I don't understand, Captain, the instruments. They're not responding. It's like we're in a place outside the reach of normal space-time." "Then what are we supposed to do?" Harris asked, his voice tinged with panic. Riley didn't have an answer. All he knew was that they couldn't remain in this void forever. They needed to understand where they were and what, if anything, could bring them back to Earth. "We need to keep moving," Riley said, gripping the control yoke tightly. "We've come this far, we're not going to stop now." With a deep breath, Riley guided the flying boat forward, its engines humming softly as it cut through the silent void. The crew remained quiet, each lost in their own thoughts, trying to process the enormity of what they were experiencing. They had crossed into a different dimension, passed through a wormhole, and now found themselves in a cosmic space so alien that their minds struggled to grasp the scope of it. But this new reality was not the only thing on their minds. There was something else, something darker lurking in the far reaches of this strange universe. It wasn't long before Matthews's voice broke the silence. "Captain, you need to see this." Riley turned to Matthews, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. "What is it?" Matthews was staring intently at his console, his fingers tapping quickly across the keyboard. "There's something ahead, something huge, it's moving." The rest of the crew crowded around Matthews, leaning in to see what he was seeing. On the screen, a massive shadow loomed in the distance, far larger than any object they had ever encountered. At first, Riley thought it might be a nebula or some other cosmic cloud, but as they drew closer, it became clear that this was something far more terrifying. It was a battle, a war, and it was happening right in front of them. Hundreds, maybe thousands of ships, some sleek and smooth, others jagged and worn, were engaged in a violent conflict. Explosions lit up the sky as ships fired energy weapons, beams of light streaking across the void. The air, or what passed for air in this dimension, seemed to crackle with the intensity of the battle. The crew watched, stunned, as warships of unimaginable size and shape clashed, their massive hulls lighting up with bursts of energy. The sheer scale of the conflict was unlike anything they had ever seen. "What the hell is this?" Harris asked, his voice a mix of awe and fear. Riley could only stare in disbelief. "I don't know, but we're not alone here. We've stumbled into something much bigger than ourselves." The crew was silent, watching in horror as the war unfolded before them. The ships were not human, that much was clear. They were alien, designed in shapes that defied earthly logic. Some were spherical, others had elongated asymmetrical designs that seemed to bend the laws of physics. Some were organic in appearance, with tendrils that reached out like arms, while others appeared mechanical, crafted from metals and alloys that were unfamiliar to the crew. But it wasn't just the ships that made the scene so terrifying. It was the sheer scale of the battle. This wasn't a small skirmish. This was a war between civilizations. Advanced, powerful races locked in a struggle for control over a region of space they didn't yet understand. Riley's mind raced. The sheer power of the ships, the weapons they wielded, it was beyond anything humanity could even dream of. Yet there they were, caught in the middle of it. The flying boat, a relic of Earth's past, was a speck in the vastness of this war, a lone survivor, caught between forces that were far beyond its comprehension. "We need to get out of here," Matthews said urgently, his fingers dancing over the controls. "We can't stay here, we'll be caught in the crossfire." Riley's gaze remained fixed on the battle, his mind churning. He knew Matthews was right, they couldn't just sit idly by, but they also couldn't ignore what they were witnessing. This was a moment of history, a glimpse into a larger universe, one that humanity had never even imagined. And if they didn't act now, they might be lost in the chaos forever. "We can't just leave," Riley said, his voice firm. "We need to understand what's going on here. If we can learn from this, we might find a way back to Earth." "But how?" Harris protested. "Look at them, they're far more advanced than we are. We're just a small speck of dust compared to these ships." Riley turned to face the crew. "We have no choice. We need to learn everything we can about this war, these civilizations. Whatever's going on here, it's bigger than us, but maybe we can use that. Maybe we can find a way out of this dimension. But first, we need to survive." For a moment, there was silence. The crew exchanged uneasy glances, each one grappling with the enormity of the decision before them. But finally, Matthews spoke again, his voice resolute. "What do you want us to do, Captain?" "We need to stay out of their way," Riley said, nodding toward the battle. "We can't just fly aimlessly. We need to figure out who's fighting and why. And if there's any way we can make contact with them, we will." With a deep breath, Riley set the controls of the flying boat, steering it slowly toward the outer edges of the battle. The ships that fought in the distance seemed oblivious to their presence, too absorbed in their violent struggle to notice the small, vulnerable aircraft. Still, Riley couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Something, or someone, was keeping an eye on them. For the next several hours, they drifted silently at the edge of the conflict, watching as the battle raged on. The larger ships seemed to hold their own, while smaller, faster vessels darted between them, weaving in and out of combat. It was a chaotic, unpredictable display of warfare, one that defied the rules of traditional combat. There were no predictable patterns, no clear winners, just endless destruction and endless war. It was then that Matthews spoke up again. "Captain, there's something strange about these ships. They're not all fighting each other. Some of them are moving toward each other. They're forming a kind of formation." Riley squinted at the screen. Matthews was right. Some of the ships, rather than continuing their assault, were regrouping, forming a circle. Their energy weapons powered down, and they seemed to be communicating. But how? "I think they're trying to form an alliance," Matthews said, his voice tentative. Maybe they're trying to broker some kind of peace." Riley felt a strange hope rise within him. Could it be that amidst all this chaos, there was the possibility of peace? Could they make contact with one of these civilizations? Perhaps there was a way out of this mess after all. "We need to get closer," Riley said, his eyes glinting with resolve. "We need to find a way to make contact, if we're going to survive here. We need to understand who's in charge, who's fighting, and why." He maneuvered the flying boat closer to the edge of the formation, keeping a safe distance from the ongoing chaos. The battle was still raging around them, but the group of ships that had formed the circle seemed to be communicating in some way that Riley couldn't yet understand. As the flying boat drifted closer, a strange thing began to happen. The ships in the circle seemed to notice them. Their weapons powered down, and the ship's movements became slower, more deliberate. Riley felt a chill run down his spine. Had they been detected? In this chapter, the crew witnesses a vast cosmic battle, one far beyond anything humanity has experienced. As they navigate this alien conflict, they're faced with the harsh reality that they are not just survivors. They are intruders in a war that has raged for eons. Their quest to understand the situation becomes even more urgent as they attempt to make contact with one of the warring factions, hoping for a way back to Earth. But the question remains, will they be able to survive the cosmic conflict? Or will they become casualties in a war they don't understand? As the flying boat drifted closer to the strange formation of alien warships, the atmosphere inside the cockpit became thick with tension. Every member of the crew was hyper-aware of the situation, their eyes fixed on the screens and their fingers hovering over controls, ready for any sudden change. They had entered a universe beyond their comprehension, and now, in the midst of an interstellar war, they were trying to make contact with one of these powerful civilizations. But something felt off. Something about the situation gnawed at the back of Captain Riley's mind. It wasn't just the ships or the battle that concerned him. It was the strange connection between their own flying boat and the U-boat, the vessel that had unwittingly followed them into this dimension. The U-boat had been a constant presence, ever since that fateful encounter over the Atlantic. Riley had hoped that the strange forces pulling them into this otherworldly realm had left it behind. But no matter how far they traveled or how deep they ventured into the unknown, the U-boat was still there somewhere, lurking in the cosmic expanse. It was an unsettling thought. Why had the U-boat been drawn into this dimension with them? And more importantly, why was it still here? As the flying boat maneuvered cautiously near the formation of alien ships, Matthews, the navigator, suddenly spoke, his voice crackling with uncertainty. "Captain, I've been trying to scan the area for any signs of the U-boat, but the readings are strange. It's like there's a signal, almost like a tether between us and that thing." Riley frowned. "A tether? What are you talking about?" Matthews quickly adjusted his console, trying to fine-tune the scans. "There's a faint signal coming from somewhere behind us, Captain. I think it's the U-boat. It's not just following us, Captain. It's actively trying to maintain a connection, some kind of energy pulse that's coming from it." Riley's brow furrowed in concern. The U-boat was more than just an enemy now. It was as though it had become an extension of their journey, an anchor that had latched onto them the moment they had crossed into this strange dimension. The realization hit him. The battle between the flying boat and the U-boat wasn't random. It was part of something much larger, something that neither of them could yet understand. "Can you trace it?" Riley asked. "I'm trying, Captain. The signal is weak but steady. It's coming from a specific location. It's about 100 miles behind us near the edge of the battle," Matthews replied. Riley felt a shiver run down his spine. The U-boat was far more than just a remnant of Earth's past. It was part of the puzzle they were trying to solve. Something about the energy it was emitting, its connection to their aircraft, felt deliberate, as if it were meant to bring them together. But for what purpose? "Is there any chance it's a trap?" Harris asked, voice tense. "The U-boat, it's part of the battle somehow. It doesn't seem like a coincidence that it's here with us." Riley looked at the screen, watching as the alien ships in the distance continued to move in coordinated patterns, their weapons inactive for the moment. The tension was palpable. It was clear that something monumental was happening, but the crew didn't yet know what. "It's not a coincidence," Riley said, more to himself than to anyone else. "There's something happening. Something beyond just a simple battle. We need to get closer to the U-boat, find out what it's doing." With a steady hand, Riley adjusted the flying boat's course, guiding it toward the faint signal Matthews had identified. They were headed directly into the path of the battle, where the U-boat had appeared to be lingering. The thought of being caught in the crossfire of two alien factions was not comforting, but there was no turning back now. They had no choice but to push forward. As they neared the coordinates, the sense of dread in the cockpit grew. The quiet, vast expanse of space felt even more oppressive now. The crew's collective focus was on the readouts, watching the signal grow stronger as they approached. The moment the U-boat appeared on their radar, Matthews let out a soft gasp. "It's right ahead, Captain. Just look at it." Riley's heart skipped a beat. The U-boat was drifting, its once menacing silhouette now appearing strangely dormant. It was floating on the edge of the battlefield, but it didn't seem to be engaged in the combat. It was as if it were waiting, listening, or perhaps drawing energy from the very fabric of space itself. "Why isn't it attacking?" Harris muttered. "It should be trying to take us down, right?" Riley studied the U-boat carefully, scanning for any signs of activity, but there was no movement from its guns, no sign of life on board. It was almost as if it were part of the battlefield, but not in the way they expected. The U-boat was no longer an aggressor, it was an observer. "That's not all," Matthew said, his voice suddenly filled with disbelief. "Captain, this isn't just a U-boat, it's been altered. There's something strange about it. Look at the energy readings. It's like it's been upgraded somehow, like it's resonating with this dimension." Riley's mind raced. What could possibly have caused such a transformation? The U-boat had been part of the conflict in the ocean, a relic of war. But now in this alien realm it was something else entirely. It had become an object that resonated with the very fabric of the universe, tied into the energy forces that controlled this dimension. Altered by who and why? Riley asked, his voice tight with the urgency of the situation. They had been pulled into this strange dimension with the U-boat, and now it appeared that whatever had altered the U-boat had also brought them here. There was no escaping the connection between the two vessels. Suddenly an alarm went off. The instruments in the cockpit blinked red as Matthews worked frantically to decipher the new data flooding in. "Captain, I think the U-boat is trying to communicate with us." Riley's eyes widened. The thought hadn't crossed his mind. Was it possible? Could the U-boat, despite being a product of Earth's war, have somehow become part of this dimension's reality? Was it trying to warn them, guide them, or perhaps even offer them something? "How is that possible?" Harris asked, his voice a mixture of disbelief and intrigue. "We're not sure yet," Matthews replied, "but the signal, it's changing. It's starting to sync with our frequency. It's as though it's trying to open a channel." Open a channel to what? Riley asked. The question was burning in his mind. The U-boat, a deadly weapon of war, could now be part of something much larger than they ever imagined. As if to answer his question, the flying boat shuddered. The hum of its engines deepened, and the air in the cockpit seemed to grow thick with static. The crew exchanged anxious glances as the ship's lights flickered. Then a voice crackled through the speakers, a low, distorted tone, at first unintelligible but then becoming clearer. The words, although broken and warped, were unmistakable. "You are needed." The voice was not human, it was something else, something ancient, resonating with a power they could barely begin to comprehend. "Who are you?" Riley asked, his voice steady despite the surge of fear and confusion that gripped him. "You are part of the plan." The voice cut out, leaving only silence in its wake. The entire cockpit was filled with the weight of its meaning. Captain Riley looked at his crew, each of them equally stunned by the sudden revelation. The U-boat, an instrument of destruction, was now something far more. It was a messenger, a guide, an unexpected link between their world and the larger forces at play in this dimension. But what was the plan, and what role did they play in it? The crew was left in stunned silence, grappling with the implications of what had just occurred. The U-boat had been part of something larger than their battle. It had crossed dimensions, transformed, and now it was communicating with them. "Whatever this is," Riley said slowly, his voice filled with newfound determination, "it's just the beginning." The crew didn't speak for a moment, but each of them felt the weight of those words. They had crossed into the unknown, into a war far beyond their understanding. And now it seemed that the universe itself had chosen them to play a part in whatever was unfolding. "Prepare for what's coming next," Riley said, his voice firm. "We have no idea where this is taking us, but we can't turn back." They were about to embark on a journey that would unravel the mysteries of the universe, but what awaited them was still a mystery. The only thing certain was that they were no longer just observers, they were part of a grand cosmic design. In this chapter, the crew unearths the deeper mystery surrounding the U-boat and its connection to the alien forces that control the dimension they find themselves in. The once simple enemy has transformed into an enigmatic force, and its communication with the crew opens new questions about their role in this larger cosmic battle. The U-boat has become both a guide and a key to the unfolding mystery, and its message marks the beginning of an even greater journey into the unknown. The chilling voice that had echoed through the cockpit was still fresh in the minds of the crew. The words, fragmented yet clear, were impossible to forget. "You are needed, part of the plan." The mystery of it lingered, hanging heavily in the air as Captain Riley and his team tried to process the implications. The U-boat had stopped being an adversary, it had become something else entirely. The crew was no longer simply navigating a foreign dimension. They were participants in something that was beyond their comprehension, part of a plan they couldn't yet grasp. Riley stared at the alien ships in the distance, still locked in their cosmic battle. The war between the various factions raged on, but it felt like it was just the backdrop to a much larger story. The flying boat, once an unassuming aircraft caught in a deadly skirmish, had now become a vessel that was tethered to something far more ancient and powerful than it could have ever imagined. "What do you think it means, Captain?" Matthews asked, his voice filled with curiosity and concern. "Part of the plan? What kind of plan could we be part of?" Riley turned toward Matthews, his brow furrowed in thought. "I don't know yet, but I have a feeling that whatever this plan is, it's bigger than just us. It's like the U-boat was sent here for a reason, and now we're caught in the middle of it." The crew was still trying to make sense of their situation. The strange energy that had altered the U-boat, the cryptic message they had received, and the ongoing war between alien factions, everything felt interconnected. The problem was, they didn't know how. They were just beginning to realize that their role in this strange cosmic drama might be far more significant than they could have ever imagined. "Should we try to make contact again?" Harris asked, his voice tinged with uncertainty. "With the U-boat, I mean, maybe it can help us figure out what's really going on. Riley hesitated. The U-boat's message had been clear enough. You are needed. But for what? To fight, to help broker peace, or perhaps, as they had feared, to become pawns in a larger galactic game that had been unfolding long before their arrival. We need more information, Riley finally said. We're not going to get answers by sitting here. We've got to get closer to the U-boat, see if we can make contact again. Maybe we can figure out what it's doing, why it's still here, and why we've been dragged into this. The decision made, Riley adjusted the controls, steering the flying boat toward the distant U-boat. As they moved closer, the tension inside the cockpit grew. The crew was acutely aware of the alien warships all around them. The ship seemed oblivious to the small, unarmed aircraft that now floated toward the U-boat, but it was only a matter of time before their presence would be noticed. They couldn't afford to remain an unknown player for long. We're in range, Captain, Matthews said, watching the data on his screen. The U-boat is still maintaining that signal. I think it's getting stronger. The flying boat shuddered again as if responding to the pulsing energy that emanated from the U-boat. It was as if they were drawing closer to something, a threshold, a doorway that had the power to change everything. Prepare for anything, Riley said. We don't know what we're walking into. As they neared the U-boat, something unexpected happened. The alien ships, which had been locked in their violent conflict, suddenly stopped. Their weapons powered down. Their movements slowed, almost as if they were waiting, watching. The battle had come to an abrupt halt, leaving an eerie quiet in its wake. Why did they stop? Harris asked, his voice hushed. What's going on? Riley didn't have an answer. He felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up as he gazed at the warships. The sudden stillness in the air was unsettling. The crew was no longer just witnesses to a battle, they were becoming part of it. Whatever had caused the ships to stop, whatever force had compelled them to cease their attacks, it was now pulling the flying boat deeper into the unknown. The U-boat was now clearly visible ahead of them, drifting like a ghost in space. Its once imposing form now appeared strangely subdued, like a relic of the past that had somehow crossed into another realm, but something about it had changed. The alien energy that surrounded it pulsed in rhythmic waves, each pulse stronger than the last. As the flying boat drew closer, the ship's console emitted a series of sharp beeps, signaling that the U-boat was once again trying to communicate. Riley felt his heartbeat quicken. The U-boat wasn't just following them anymore, it was actively engaging with them, reaching out. Captain, it's happening again, Matthews said. The U-boat is transmitting a message, it's trying to speak to us again. This time the voice was clearer, more resonant. Prepare for the transition, the voice said, its tone calm but filled with authority. The time has come for you to take your place. Riley's mind raced. Transition? What transition, and what did they mean by take your place? He wasn't sure whether to feel fear, awe, or confusion, but one thing was certain, the crew was no longer just spectators. They were being drawn into something much larger than they had ever imagined. We're being called to action, Matthews said, his voice quiet, almost reverent. We can't ignore this. The U-boat has been altered for a reason. It's part of something we're supposed to do. Whatever this is, Riley said, taking a deep breath, we don't have much of a choice now. We need to trust that the U-boat can guide us, at least for now. Whatever this transition is, it might be our only way to understand what's happening here. With a sudden burst of energy, the flying boat lurched forward. The instruments in the cockpit went haywire again, flashing red as the ship's systems struggled to keep up with the bizarre fluctuations in energy surrounding them. The crew braced themselves, gripping their seats as the force pulling them forward grew stronger. The U-boat, still ahead, was now surrounded by a swirling vortex of energy, one that seemed to be pulling everything in. What's happening? Harris asked, his voice cracking with fear. What is that thing? Before anyone could respond, the energy surrounding them reached its peak. The flying boat was sucked into the vortex, and for a moment everything went dark. When the light returned, the crew found themselves no longer floating in the midst of the battle. The U-boat was gone, and so were the alien warships. The air felt thick with a palpable sense of power, as though they had crossed into a new realm entirely. But it wasn't just the environment that had changed. The crew felt different too. There was a strange energy coursing through the air, an awareness that they were no longer just passengers in this journey. They had been transformed, and whatever that transformation meant, they were now ready to face it. Where are we? Matthews asked, his voice filled with awe and apprehension. Riley looked out the cockpit window, his eyes scanning the new reality before them. What lay ahead was a place that no human had ever seen. The stars were different, the energy in the air was different, and the very fabric of reality seemed to bend and warp before their eyes. This wasn't just a new part of the universe, it was a different plane of existence, one that was alive and pulsing with energy. It's a new beginning, Riley said, his voice quiet. Whatever this transition is, we're in the heart of it now, and we're going to have to find a way to navigate it because this is just the beginning. The crew sat in silence, each one processing the enormity of what had just happened. They were no longer just lost in space, trapped in an alien dimension. They had crossed a threshold, and whatever lay ahead was their destiny. Riley knew that their mission had changed. They were no longer fighting for survival. They were now part of something far grander, something that could reshape not just their understanding of the universe but their place in it. "Let's move forward," Riley said, his voice firm. "We've been given a chance, now we take it." With a sense of resolve, the flying boat moved forward into the unknown, ready to embrace whatever challenges awaited them. In this chapter, the crew finally begins to understand their role in the cosmic drama that has unfolded around them. The U-boat, once an enemy, has become a guide, leading them toward a transition that will change everything. The sense of urgency increases as they are pulled into a new realm, one that challenges their understanding of the universe. They are no longer passive travelers. They are active participants in something far bigger than they ever imagined. Their journey is just beginning, and the stakes have never been higher. The transition had been swift, violent even. The flying boat, once floating in the heart of the cosmic battlefield, was now in an entirely new space, vast, quiet, and different in ways that the crew couldn't yet comprehend. It was as if the very laws of physics had changed. The stars outside their windows were unfamiliar, arranged in patterns that defied the traditional constellations they had once known. Some were too close, others too far away, and some seemed to pulse not with light but with an energy they couldn't quite understand. The air in the cockpit felt thicker, almost alive, as though the atmosphere itself had changed, becoming heavier, more tangible. The tension was unbearable. The crew sat in silence, each person grappling with the enormity of their situation. They had crossed into a new dimension, guided by the altered U-boat, and now they had no idea what awaited them. "Captain," Matthews said after a long silence, breaking the quiet with his voice full of quiet awe, I think we've done it. We've crossed into a new realm, but I can't understand what it is." Riley didn't respond immediately. He was still staring out the window, lost in thought. They had crossed into something truly alien, something that felt like the very core of the universe itself. The energy around them was unlike anything they had ever encountered, and yet it wasn't hostile. It was inviting, pulsating with a rhythm that seemed to resonate with their very beings. For the first time since they had entered this strange dimension, Riley felt a flicker of hope. They had crossed through the wormhole. They had survived the cosmic battle. They had met the U-boat's mysterious force. But what now? What do you think happens now, Captain? Harris asked, his voice laced with uncertainty. "We've crossed into the unknown, but is it possible that we could go back to Earth, I mean?" The thought had crossed Riley's mind as well, but there were too many unknowns. They were no longer in the universe they knew. The laws of physics seemed to be mutable here, as if reality itself was more fluid. How could they even begin to figure out how to get home? If returning to Earth was even possible? "We need to figure out where we are first," Riley said, his voice calm but filled with an undercurrent of urgency. "Before we even think about going back, we need to understand what this place is. We don't know if time is the same here or if our reality has been changed in ways we can't predict." Matthews nodded, his fingers already flying over his console, trying to scan their surroundings. But the readings were strange. The instruments didn't make sense. The stars were too close, too intense. Space itself seemed different, warped, stretched, as though they were looking at the universe through a distorted lens. "Captain," Matthews said, his voice rising in alarm. "The readings they're saying we're back near Earth, but the time difference, it doesn't add up. We should have been gone for hours, days even, but the signals we're receiving, they're outdated. The Earth we're reading is not the Earth we left." A cold shiver ran down Riley's spine. He turned to Matthews, his face hardening. "What do you mean, not the Earth we left?" Matthews hesitated, staring at the data on his console, disbelief written across his face. "It's like the Earth is in the past, a year, maybe even a decade before we left. It's as if we've traveled backward through time, or maybe we've shifted into an alternate timeline." The words hung in the air, the gravity of their meaning sinking in. If they had returned to Earth, they had done so under circumstances they couldn't begin to understand. Had they crossed into a parallel universe? Had they altered the timeline itself? Or had they just witnessed an Earth that was a reflection of their own, one that had not yet felt the impact of their disappearance? "Are you sure?" Riley asked, his voice tight with uncertainty. "How is that even possible?" "I don't know," Matthews replied, "but the readings are clear. The Earth's signal is different. It's like we've gone back in time or into a different version of reality." The rest of the crew fell into stunned silence. The implications were staggering. If they had somehow traveled to a different version of Earth, a timeline where their disappearance had yet to occur, then everything they had known, everything they had fought for had been altered. The war, the mission, the relationships, they might not exist the way they remembered. But there was one thing that Riley knew for certain. The universe was unpredictable, and no matter how much they tried to control their fate, they were now part of something far beyond their understanding. "Captain," Harris said quietly, breaking the silence. "What do we do now?" Riley's thoughts were a whirl of confusion. They had crossed into the unknown, faced impossible odds, and were now staring at a version of Earth that was not their own. Could they change it? Could they even go back? What if they were trapped here, in a version of Earth where their past had never been written? "First, we need to confirm it," Riley said firmly. We need to get closer, scan the planet's surface, see what's changed, and then we make our decision. They set the flying boat on course for Earth, which now loomed large ahead of them. The once familiar continent stretched beneath them, but there was something unnerving about the sight. It was Earth, but it wasn't. The oceans were the same, the mountains, the clouds, but the subtle differences in the way the planet reflected light, the way the land seemed untouched, hinted that this wasn't the same world they had left behind. As they descended toward the atmosphere, Matthew spoke again, his voice more urgent now. "Captain, I'm getting strange readings from Earth's atmosphere. It's like it's still in an early phase of development. The air composition is different." Riley frowned. "What do you mean different?" "It's as if this Earth hasn't gone through the same processes. The levels of carbon dioxide are higher than they should be, and the ozone layer, it's thinner. It's almost like the planet hasn't undergone the same environmental changes that we know Earth went through." Riley's heart pounded. "You're telling me Earth's environment is still in a pre-industrial state?" Matthews nodded, his expression grave. "That's what the scans suggest." "Then this isn't just a different timeline," Riley said, realization dawning on him. "This is an alternate version of Earth, one that never went through the same changes, the same wars, the same history. We've crossed into a reality where everything is still in flux." Harris let out a low whistle. "So, what now? We've landed on a version of Earth where humanity hasn't even made the same mistakes." Riley didn't know how to respond. If this was truly an alternate Earth, one where everything was still in the early stages, then their presence here could be a disaster. They couldn't simply walk onto this Earth, change things, and expect to leave. The delicate balance of this version of the planet could be disrupted by their very existence. "We need to be careful," Riley said finally, his voice low. "We're not just visitors, we're intruders. If we change anything at all, it could affect this world in ways we can't predict." The crew sat in stunned silence, absorbing the weight of Riley's words. They had crossed into a reality where the world was still on the brink of its own development, and their presence here could unravel the fabric of this timeline. But just as Riley prepared to give the order to pull back, a sudden signal blinked on his console, a transmission. The signal was faint but clear. "It's from Earth," Matthews said, his voice filled with surprise. "It's not a regular communication, it's a beacon." Riley's heart raced. "A beacon from where?" "It's coming from the surface, close to a large city. It looks like it's emitting a distress signal. It's like a warning." The crew exchanged uneasy glances. This Earth, this alternate version of the planet, wasn't as untouched as it seemed. Someone or something was sending out a signal, and it was clear that the world they had landed in was not as stable as it appeared. "We need to investigate," Riley said, his decision final. "We can't leave yet, not until we understand what this is. If there's someone here, someone trying to reach out, then we need to find them." With a shared sense of urgency, the crew guided the flying boat toward the source of the distress signal. They had come this far. Now, they were about to step onto a world that wasn't their own, a world filled with uncertainties and dangers they couldn't even begin to fathom. In this chapter, the crew is confronted with the shocking revelation that they have returned to Earth, only it isn't the Earth they left. This version of Earth is stuck in a pre-industrial phase, its environment in an earlier, undeveloped state. The crew now faces the moral dilemma of whether they should interfere with this alternate reality, while a distress signal calls them to investigate further. Their journey takes a new turn as they realize they must tread carefully in a world that could be changed forever by their actions. The mysteries of this alternate Earth are just beginning to unfold, and the crew's role in it remains uncertain.